meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 98, actually I'm reading that upside down. 98 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments to the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. And just a reminder, before we proceed, I simply want to remind members to be very careful when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbour's microphone is turned on. Earpieces placed too close to a microphone are one of the most common causes of sound feedback, which is extremely harmful to interpreters and causes serious injuries. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on February 8, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of plans to prevent violence during the 2024 Elver fishing season. We have with us today officials from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I welcome Annette Gibbons, Deputy Minister, Adam Burns, Assistant Deputy Minister, Programme Sector, Brent Napier, Acting Director General, Conservation and Protection, and Doug Wenzel, Regional Director General, Maritimes Region. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. I know it's not your first time to be here before committee. You will have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement, and I will invite Ms. Gibbons to make her statement.
Mr. Chair.
When you're ready. Yes, Mr. Cormier.
Mr. Chair, I know that this meeting is important today, but I move that the committee resume consideration of the debate on my motion on succession planning from February 8, 2024.
So moved. Vote on the motion.
Did we hear the motion again?
Yeah. Okay, the motion is that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a 5-meeting study on the need for training and financial support for next generation of fishers, given the challenges they face entering into the field, given the high cost of licenses and equipment, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. And that, number one, that the witnesses include young fish harvesters and aspiring young fish harvesters. That witnesses include representatives from the fish harvesting industry and the fish harvester unions. And 3, that witnesses come from a wide variety of regional and linguistic backgrounds, including Indigenous representation. Furthermore, pursuant to Standing Order 1089, the committee asked that the government provide a comprehensive response to its report. Mr. Perkins.
So this is a cowardly move by the Liberals to avoid accountability.
Mr. Chair,
I have the floor to avoid accountability for the fact that they made an announcement today to destroy the Elver fishery. You're trying to avoid your mismanagement and your incompetence.
Mr. Chair, this motion should not be debatable at all. I just want to clarify with the clerk. I just said from the beginning that
every one of you is a coward. A nasty coward who hates fishermen by what you're doing today. Every one of you.
So, Mr.
There
Chair,
is a motion, and the clerk tells me it is non-debatable, and we have to go to the vote immediately.
Cowards. Cowards, cowards, cowards. Every one of you. You're shameful.
Mr. Perkins. Okay.
Your motion is shameful.
Mr. Perkins.
Mr.
Perkins, please. You haven't been recognized to speak. Please stay quiet while we do the vote, please. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Kellaway.
Yes.
Mr. Hanley.
You're going to shut it down?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Cormier.
Oui.
Mr. Morrissey.
Yes.
Mr. Arnold.
Nay.
Mr. Bragdon. Mr. Tolmie.
Nay.
Mr. Perkins.
I want to vote against this attempt to shut the committee down and the costly NDP coalition.
Mr. Small.
Against.
Madame Desbiens. Ms. Barron.
I was going to vote with you, but now I'm second guessing that.
Ms. Barron.
You know what? Big yes. So much.
7 nays, 4 against.
Okay?
No. 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Yep. Motion is passed. Mr. Morrissey, you had your hand up?
Just a clarification. First, Chair, the vote was to move the motion to the committee, correct? Is to adopt for discussion?
Resume debate.
Yes, resume today. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment to propose on the motion, a simple amendment on the motion that was, that's on the floor, and I have it in all the languages. I'll pass that to the clerk. It's in order to move the amendment now, Madam Clerk? That would read, and the following, I would add the following directly after bullet 3 of Mr. Cormier's motion, which would read that the committee commence this study immediately after the conclusion of the committee's study on the 5-year review of the Fishery Act. Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll wait till the actual motion or amendment is circulated. Okay. Okay, Mr. Morrissey, I believe everybody has a copy of the amendment. If you'd like to read into the record again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that to add the following directly after bullet 3 of Mr. Cormier's motion, and it would read, it would be number 4, that the committee commence this study immediately after the conclusion of the committee's study on the 5-year review of the Fishery Act.
Okay, we've heard the terms of the amendment. Seeing no discussion, we'll have the vote.
Mr. Kelloway.
Yes.
Mr. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Cormier.
Oui.
Mr. Morrissey.
We.
Mr. Hanley.
Yes.
Mr. Arnold.
Yes.
Mr. Tolmie.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Small.
Yes.
Madame Desbiens. Ms. Barron.
Yes.
11 yeas, none nays.
Mr.
Point
Cormier.
of order, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify what happened here, in no way we wanted to shut down this meeting. This took 5 minutes to pass everything that we were passing right now on a motion that I was debating last meeting that we adjourned. We want to hear for those officials. I think the comment from my colleagues, Perkin, were a little bit hard of order. But look, Mr. Chair, I think we can get out. I think we can get out with this. Get on with this meeting right now. There was no attempt to shut down this meeting. It was just to, be able to resolve some businesses that we were not able to resolve at the last meeting. So, again, I don't expect an apologize, but I think the members should apologize for the comment that he made. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll go right to the opening statement now by Ms. Gibbons for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my officials and I are pleased to be here today with you.
The motion?
No, we have to vote on the motion.
Oh, okay, sorry. My mistake, missed a meeting.
And you can,
Thank you.
Apply. You can apply it.
Is everybody agreed to apply? Okay. Any? What?
Do you adopt the motion?
Yeah. Yeah. When he comes out of his shell, he does wonders. Okay, back to you, Ms. Gibbons.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Officials from the department and I are pleased to be here today. I'll start by saying that Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to the conservation of American eel, with sustainability and orderly management being priorities for the Elver fishery. This is an extremely lucrative fishery, Canada's highest value by weight, and as such it attracts significant illegal harvesting. This happens in hundreds of rivers in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, often at night, and often in isolated places that are not easily accessible. This makes it very difficult to monitor and fight illegal Elver harvesting. It is also an easy fishery to get into with few barriers to entry. All that is needed is a dip net, no specialized training, vessels, or other equipment. And there are vast, intricate, and lucrative supply chains available following the point of harvest. So it's an extremely appealing species for those who are involved in this illegal activity. This presents compelling and challenging risks to conservation of the species and to public safety. Les inspections, les observations.
Inspections, monitoring, and reports made with regard to conservation and protection show that large quantities of elvers are illegally harvested, and we believe that the total catch is much beyond the authorized catch. This compromises the objectives for conservation and protection of the American eel in Canada and threatens the protection and conservation of the population. Elver fishing has become a cause of unacceptable behavior. Harassment, threats, violence between fishers and with regard to fisheries agents. There have been incidents, violence incidents, confrontations, which are an immediate threat to public safety and to the management of this fishery. Conservation Protection and its partners responsible for applying the law have received many complaints concerning acts of violence, intrusions, material damage, infractions linked to weapons, organized crime, other risks, including sequestration for public
to the commercial Elver fishery in 2023 than we did to any other commercial fishery. We were pulling officers from other parts of the country to support our officers in the Maritimes, and obviously this isn't sustainable for many reasons. Ultimately, for the safety of our fisheries officers and the public, and for the sustainability of the species, the Elver fishery was closed in 2023 through a ministerial fisheries management order. This is the second time the fishery has been shut down in the past 4 years. Au cours des dernières années,
over recent years, there have been a number of discussions between the ministry, permit holders, and other stakeholders, and this has shown the need to develop new tools, new approaches to manage and monitor effectively and efficiently Elver fishing. Without such changes, it's very probable that the 2024 season will continue with the unacceptable trend we've noted these past years.
My department has been working with industry, First Nations, and other stakeholders to chart a path forward. Au cours de cet examen, les changements.
During this review, we've noted important changes needed. For example, improved access for Indigenous communities, a new regulatory framework to govern and authorize the possession and export of elvers, as well as a number of operational changes with regard to the management of elver fishing. Many of the needed changes are based on the adoption of new regulations, in particular with the definition and implementation of a new tracing system that would allow us to track the movements of elvers.
While we have made a great deal of progress in all three of these areas, we're not quite there yet. And for that reason, earlier today, the Minister wrote to current license holders, including Indigenous organizations and First Nations, to share her view that it is not possible to have a safe and sustainable elver fishery in 2024, and therefore the fishery should not be opened. The Minister also invited license holders to share any relevant comments they may have to help inform her final decision. Not opening the fishery this season would support law enforcement and conservation objectives in the near term and allow for the design and implementation of regulations, management measures, and traceability tools to better control illegal and unauthorized harvesting in future years. Once the 10-day comment period is over and all input has been considered, the Minister will make a decision on the fishery for 2024. I'm optimistic about what we can achieve through cooperation of all those interested in this fishery, a combined focus on the conservation of the species, reconciliation, and a collective commitment to safe and orderly conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbons. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for questions. 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is indeed a very dark day for the fishery. This department and 6 ministers in 8 years have mismanaged this fishery almost like no other. In 2000, you did a complete shutdown, as you're doing today, of the elver fishery because of poaching, because of illegal harvesting. And the industry said how to fix it. And this department did nothing since then, absolutely nothing to fix it. Help me understand the rationale of a ministerial decision and presumably recommendation from the department that supports this, that thinks that taking the people who abide by the law off the river deters thousands of illegal, international, criminally financed harvesters who are poaching and destroying the fishery. How does taking legal harvesters off the river help stop the poaching?
So at present, when there's a authorized harvest in previous years, there is a mixing of the authorized harvest and the unauthorized harvest.
Unauthorized harvest.
There is a mixing, there is a laundering that happens all along the supply chain at harvest and at various points of sale, which makes it very difficult to know what is the authorized portion and not. It makes it very easy for those acting illegally to carry on their activity.
But with due respect, Deputy, that's just bunk. Every licensed harvester is assigned to a specific river with a specific DFO license with that on their nets. Everybody else that's not on those rivers is a poacher. It's easy to identify poachers. I do every night when this has started. They're already fighting over river space. They're setting up nets now. You have just made it worse. The minister has just made it worse. And Mr. Wenzel has just made it worse with your lack of ability to enforce the law. So I'll ask again, because you didn't answer the question. Removing the licensed elver fishers who have a 9,000 plus kilogram tack, when almost 100 tons of elvers were being poached and exported out of the Toronto airport, all of which your enforcement people know where it's coming from. How does that stop poaching on the river? Just a quick answer. How does it stop poaching on the river?
So removing this capacity to launder does serve as a deterrent, to launder the illegal and legal.
And how's that working out? Since it's growing by exponential portion every year. In 2020, you said this would help. Poaching doubled. In 2021, it doubled. In 2022, it doubled. It quadrupled last year, and you shut it down after 18 minutes. Mr. Kerr, who works for your department, in April last year told the media you had adequate policing resources to police the Alver fishery to enforce it. Did he lie to the media?
I'm not going to comment on what
He's an
Mr. Kerr.
employee of yours, isn't he? He runs C&P in Nova Scotia. It's a very widely known article in the Chronicle Herald where he said you had adequate enforcement resources.
I understand. We put significant resources on this, on enforcement of this fishery.
So significant that we have thousands of poachers on the river now given free rein to go and do whatever they want because you couldn't handle it over the last 4 or 5 years. It didn't stop poaching in 2020. How is it going to stop poaching this year? What's the plan?
This year, all of the harvest will be illegal. We will be out in full force enforcing the fishery.
And how will you do that? Are you bringing the RCMP with you on every river? I phoned every RCMP detachment in my riding during the legal harvesting, and DFO never called once to those detachments to ask for help.
We work with our partners. We work with.
But it
the
doesn't include
RCMP.
actually showing up on the river to support DFO.
So the decision on exactly when to come for different things rests with the RCMP, as I know
The
committee
RCMP
understands.
serve as backup when called. In 2020, when we had the lobster crisis in St. Mary's Bay, CNP called the RCMP for backup, and they came in large numbers through Atlantic Canada to help. But not one call was made last year by DFO CNP to get the RCMP to back them up to end this lawlessness. Why not?
CMP makes the decision on what they need in a particular instance. It depends on the situation, but we work in partnership with the RCMP and others. We work with CBSA as well. We work with other local
And
police.
CBSA said at this committee there were no Alvers going out of this country. In this committee in December that they were aware of, they didn't even know when the Alver season was. So I don't think your communication with CBSA is working very well.
And I said in a response to that point in committee in October, I believe it was, that our understanding is that there is a legal harvest.
If we're going to
in the country.
stop the lawlessness and stop the crime, you have to arrest people on the river in large numbers. 60 is token when there were thousands of them on the river on private property last year.
We are doing significant patrol. We did significant patrols last year. We did make arrests.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have 6 minutes, so I'm going to try to get in as many questions as I can and allow you the time to answer them. If the minister were to close the fishery, does this action give CMP officers and other law enforcement officials more tools to combat illegal fishery? Does it give us more tools? And can you explain what they are?
I'm not sure that it gives us different tools, but it certainly provides a clarity. Anyone who's harvesting eels will be offside, right? Any harvest will be illegal. When the Alvers arrive in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, anything that our officers see will be subject to enforcement.
How many rivers are we talking about here? Between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia?
It is
just
roughly,
to give the people back home a picture of it.
Roughly 200, yeah.
Okay. Last season, there was a need for additional CMP officers, has been put on many different occasions in this committee to help monitor the Alver fishery. How many additional officers were, put in, and where were they chosen from? Was it just in Nova Scotia and shuffled around? Was it Atlantic Canada? Was it Canada?
So we did. I don't have the number of officers, but we did, I think, previously give the committee the number of hours of enforcement activity and the patrols, the number of patrols that we've done. We brought in officers from regions across the country. So our contingent in various regions, we're able to move people in temporarily to areas where they're needed, and we did that with this fishery last year, and we've done it in other years as well.
Okay. So I've heard on a few occasions that last year when we closed the Elver fishery for 100% legitimate reasons in terms of crime. Mr. Perkins talked about damage to property, potential of violence, actual violence. That when we stopped that, I think it was in June, if I'm not mistaken, sometime in June.
It was in April. It was in
April, sorry?
It was-
Okay.
It was 2
I'm
weeks.
53, my mind sometimes. So when we did, though, stop it, I often heard that that decreased illegal fishing. What do you say to that?
We were still out enforcing, and there were instances where we charged after the closure, and we would expect that this year as well.
I wonder if I can go to Mr. Wenzel on that. Mr. Wenzel, in terms of on the ground, what did you see before and after the closure?
So thanks so much for the question. And Mr. Chair, as the deputy said previously, a closure gives a lot of clarity, not just to our officers, but to law enforcement partners on this or any other fishery. And that clarity provides a lot more certainty in terms of structuring operations, in terms of responding to any incidents of supply, hitting into the supply chain. So again, it's not that we have extra tools, but we certainly have a lot more clarity around what's authorized versus what's not authorized.
So we have the clarity. Okay, I get that. In terms of other groups, the RCMP, for example, has been brought up today. So walk me through how we're approaching, how we approach Elver fishery in terms of that collaboration. Is it we just meet with the RCMP once in a while, once in a blue moon? Are we interconnected? Are we hardwired into them? Are they into us in terms of intel, in terms of enforcement? I wonder if you could walk us through what the collaboration actually looks like in theory, but also in practice.
So thanks again for the question. And we do collaborate really closely with enforcement partners, both RCMP and CBSA, but also local police of jurisdiction, as well as provincial enforcement counterparts. What I would say is the bulk of our collaboration involves two key streams. One would be sharing of intel. So this would be any information that we have that supports our colleagues and other enforcement bodies to carry out their role and mandate, as well as coordinating capacity. So when we do need support, if there's a particular incident that we feel falls within the mandate or jurisdiction of other police forces, we do share that information. And that dialogue happens daily. And there's also structured tables that do that information sharing on a regular and frequent basis. And just for clarity, fishery officers have a lot of authorities under the Fisheries Act to respond to fishing up to the point of first sale. Instances of violence, of trespassing, of some of the terrible incidents we've seen in this fishery over the last year, we do rely heavily on our enforcement partners, including the RCMP and police of jurisdiction, to respond to those.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, how much, or Mr. Chair, how much time? 45 seconds. 45 seconds, okay. So in terms of the main example, the state of Maine, and we're looking at best practices on how to manage the Elver fishery, to enforce, to put in place for people to be safe, that are license holders, community members that are just living there, the export of Elver. Can you distill to me very quickly the main approach, and are we seriously looking at something similar to it in terms of, obviously not for this year, but for next year?
I'm going to have to ask for that to be submitted in writing because you used up the 45 seconds asking the question. So we'll
snooze, you lose.
We'll go to Madame Desbiens now for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Happy to see you again. Witnesses, thank you to our colleagues as well with regard to this study, because it's something that I was informed about 2 years ago about, and the people that we met were really people who were deeply affected. They had, for 30 years, developed the Elver fishery, and they were working very hard to develop that fishery and have something that would be something that was very lucrative. And in the end, they came back to say that they couldn't to fish because, and it's something that happens at night. If they're often fishing at night. They're often approached, threatened, and given that fact, where people who have developed a fishery, a livelihood, like anyone who is in business, we know it's very difficult to develop your business, and there are financial risks and other risks. They find themselves faced with a situation like this. What strikes you the most, or what seems to be the greatest problem? The issuing of licenses, or increasing security as much as possible, or are all responses good responses are necessary? Any of you, if you may. Of course, the announcement today is the result of our experience up until now, and what we have done is no longer sufficient to guarantee the protection of this fishery. So for us, there are really changes needed in three areas. First of all, the issuing of licenses. This is very important, and we have made changes in recent years, and there are consultations that are still underway with the First Nations, for example, with regard to their role in this fishery. And the second thing is more regulatory controls. And right now, at the ministry, at the department, we only have the right to regulate what's happening on the rivers, the fishery in itself, and the sales afterwards, and the catches on the river, not what happens afterwards. And with regard to the catch afterwards, it's hard for us to intervene. And the regulations that will govern the whole value chain, which will govern possession of eels, of elvers during the entire supply chain. That's something we're working on. And the third part of our response will be management of the fishery, the traceability of this fishery from the initial catch, and then following in order to be able to manage the entire chain. I imagine that it's very laborious what you're trying to do, and do you have any kind of a calendar, or and when we talk about the safety of people, I mean, this is something that I would think would be fairly urgent. I think that that some of the regulations, the definition, the drafting of regulations takes time. We can't skip any steps, and it takes time to draft new regulations. And to come back to the question from Mr. Callaway, we base ourselves on the regulations that we have now, and there are the steps which require public consultations. And what about the First Nations? Are they invited to the consultations as well? Oh yes, of course. And I still have a little bit of time. Mr. Burns, what are the most common types of infractions or violations? Can you give us any details on what types of incidents you encounter? Yes, of course. We have cases where there is unauthorized fishing, where individuals who are fishing illegally, and of course, and this is something that we observed and we tried to prevent.
And for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Because I can't help myself, I have to start by highlighting how distraught I am by my colleague's behavior at the beginning of this meeting. This is a pattern of behavior that we see from this member and others within the same party, where it's felt that name-calling, yelling, and trying to get good clips is an effective way to move forward. I believe that there are other ways to be able to express anger while remaining professional and respectful with one another, and that yelling does not provide a safe working environment, in particular, a safe working environment as it relates to translators.
We have a point of order from Mr. Small.
Mr. Chair, yes, I have a point of order. I think that the member should get on with the questioning.
That's not a point of order.
We've got these.
Mr. Chair, that's not a point of order.
And this is
Mr.
irrelevant.
Chair, he's taking my time.
I shut off the time when I entertained a point of order, but I will let Mr. Small know that the 6 minutes are yours to use as you please. You can give a speech about what you baked over the weekend or what you did for the weekend. It's your time and your time to use. So,
I look forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, the behavior of my colleague resulted in an unsafe working environment for both our peers and the staff, in particular the translators who have to listen to the yelling and name-calling happening through the microphones. And so I will please ask my colleague and colleagues to perhaps take a breath when they are feeling angry, in particular without full information, and reflect on how we can communicate in a more respectful manner. So with that, thank you for allowing me to say that within the time that I've been allotted. I would like some clarification, please, Ms. Gibbons. I'm trying to understand. So in particular, there was a letter that was sent to license holders. The very first paragraph in the letter says, I'm writing to inform you of my intention to not renew any Elver licenses for the 2024 season. The statement that came out by DFO, however, states that there's consultations that are happening. In my perspective, these two conflict one another. Can you please clarify?
The letter indicates a clear intention of concerns and the possibility of not opening the fishery, not issuing the licenses for this year. But it does state later that the minister seeks comments from the license holders. And if there is comments to have those within the next 10 days, and she will then take into account the information she receives during that comment period before making a final decision. So it is clear that this is an intention based on the perspectives of the moment and the factors that are outlined in the letter, but the final decision will not be made until the minister receives comments from the license holders on the impacts on them.
Thank you for clarifying, Ms. Gibbons. Can you, with respect, the wording, I'm writing to inform you of my intention not to renew any Elver licenses. It's the very first sentence. Mm-hmm. If you were an Elver license holder, how would you interpret that very first sentence? I know if I was an Elver license holder, I would immediately assume, I don't know if I'd even read the rest of it. Mm-hmm. I would just immediately assume, well, I guess the season's closed, they've made their decision. Can you perhaps speak to the decision by the minister to have this as the very first sentence in the letter to the license holders, and perhaps reflect on how this may be shutting down the conversation before it even, or the consultation as you're referencing, before it's even begun?
The framing of the intention in that way is intended to provide clarity on what the thinking is. And so providing a very specific perspective, here is what I'm thinking now, while remaining open to perspectives, does give people something very clear that they can provide comments on.
Thank you. Can you please share with me how this relates? I know I did hear my colleague, Ms. Desbiens, mention First Nations, but how does First Nations rights to moderate livelihood play into these decisions, and what consultation has been happening alongside First Nations?
So we have had extensive discussions in recent months with First Nations on the various aspects of the fishery and the sort of three streams of work that I referred to. Of course, the first one being their interest in having a greater share of the fishery, so allocation of the fishery. So there have been discussions on that. The regulations being the second stream, we have had discussions with them on our intention to develop and bring in new regulations on the full supply chain and possession requiring a license to possess Elver all along the supply chain, essentially. So there have been discussions with them on that as well. And then on the final stream of work on the management of the fishery, certainly we've had discussions with them on that as well. So they're fully involved in all areas of thinking of the new tools and approaches that we need to manage this fishery.
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, Mr. Wenzel, if poaching of salmon is reported to be taking place on a river in Newfoundland and Labrador, what's the first step that DFO CMP would take?
So I can't speak about specific situations and what officers would decide on the ground, but they would use a range of tools to foster compliance.
Foster compliance?
Yep.
So what's the next step? After you get the call, there's someone with a net on the river.
So again, I can't speak to what CMP would do specifically in that situation, but they use a range of tools to make sure that they're able to align the activity of harvesters with what is authorized by the
You
department.
certainly would arrest them right away.
So again, I can't speak for fishery officers and what they would do in
Mr.
that
Napier,
particular.
would you arrest them right away?
No, sir, they wouldn't. So if it was a call coming in, it would be referred to a fishery officer who then may go down to the scene and assess the situation and circumstance, and based on their discretion would take appropriate action.
Okay, so typically what I've seen and others have seen is that they be arrested, they go to court, they get charged, they go to court. But typically, first of all, the first thing is that their vehicle is seized, or any personal property that's used in the poaching activities. Is that not correct?
Again, depending on the circumstances of the discretion officer, that could occur, yes.
So since heavy fines and confiscation of personal property have been brought in as DFO protocol, and I think Mr. Morley Knight back in the day brought in a lot of these things, what's been the result of poaching on salmon rivers and in general? Has it worked? Yes, Mr. Napier.
So I think what we're looking at is presenting a deterrent along the whole supply chain. So where you see officers in the field, that's important, but that's the tip of the iceberg, because that's just one point. Having deterrents along the entire supply chain, which includes the facilities that they're held at, the export points, what we're seeing is we're making noted difference. Having, 60 might not seem like a lot.
But generally, how have the deterrents been working in the poaching of Atlantic salmon?
In Atlantic salmon, they've been effective. I mean, again,
effective?
there's conservation complexities related to that species.
So how would you rate that in the Elver fishery?
I think we're learning every consecutive year. I think closing the fishery, as is being proposed, provides us a lot of tools. We mentioned visibility and some of the laundering activities, but also it decreases tension, because what we see in the public safety domain is considerable tension between authorized and unauthorized fishers.
So poaching of Elvers has been taking place for about 7 years from what we're told by stakeholders. So do you think that salmon poaching would get out of hand in the same manner that elver poaching has gotten out of hand if it's a 7-year problem? Or would you have it snuffed or nipped in the bud by now?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I believe the circumstances are different in the sense that what we're receiving is pressure from other communities.
But, you know, salmon is one species, elver is a different species. It all falls under DFO regulation. Why have you failed after 7 years? And it's all taken place under 6 different DFO ministers. This is a disgrace. How could you possibly let this happen? Ms. Gibbons.
We have put tremendous enforcement effort on this fishery, and you know, we've increased it year over year, bringing in people, as I noted earlier, bringing in people from different parts of the country. It is a very, very challenging fishery to manage at night.
Ms. Gibbons, are you saying that your government is not up to the challenge of enforcing the law?
We certainly are. We take that responsibility very seriously, enforcing the law.
So this poaching of elvers has completely spiraled out of control, and it's increased exponentially, and you've basically admitted that in your opening remarks. So why is the enforcement effort not matching the escalation in the poaching activity? Why hasn't like you could have brought in enforcement from BC, from Alberta, from the Great Lakes,
And we do.
from everywhere.
We do.
Well,
bringing in-
why only 60 charges last year?
Thank you, Mr. Small. You're going over your time, and I'd ask the Deputy Minister to provide an answer in writing if she can afterwards. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
A little change of order, sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hardy will take my spot for this. This round.
Okay. Mr. Hardy, 5 minutes or less, please.
Just a different hairdo, that's all.
Oh, big difference.
So, 60 charges. Sorry to use, a bad analogy, but you could do 600 charges like shooting fish in a barrel, given the extent of what's going on. Why only 60 charges? Why?
Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, I just want to say that, you know, as colleagues have said, as the Regional Director General for Maritimes, my role is assigning resources for CMP.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I don't need that explanation. I need to know why there are not more charges.
So laying charges involves all of the necessary steps in terms of assessing the individual circumstances, the evidence, and considering Indigenous considerations for certain harvesters.
They're on the river. And they're not Indigenous. Some of them are, of course. But if they're not Indigenous and they're on the river and they're not supposed to be fishing, they don't have a license, why do we not see more arrests?
So based on last year, Mr. Chair, we've had 107 arrests from the commercial elver fishery. We do have 60 charges to date, and I say to date because we are still processing those files. And 107 arrests, is a significant number for any fishery.
How many have gone to trial?
Pardon me?
How many have gone to trial?
So at this point, we've got the 60 charges, and it's up to the Public Prosecution Service in terms of determining which ones go to trial.
We're dealing with two different supply chains here. We're dealing with the supply chain of the elvers themselves. And I don't know what your intelligence is telling you about that, but my question is to you. You should know by this point where those fish are going, how they're getting out of the country, and where they're out of the country they're going to. Have you done the intelligence workup to clearly identify that supply chain?
We are well aware of the supply chains, yes.
Okay. Then do you know where they're landing? Where are they going when they leave Canada?
They're going to Asia.
Whereabouts?
They go to China, ultimately China.
Okay.
Other
Why do
countries.
we not know where in China, these containers are ending up? We should be able to track them. We should be able to trace back, in fact, what's going on. Do we have assets on the ground through global affairs or whatever in China to give us this information?
So This is the, we're hoping to expand out the supply chain, the point of exportation, and understanding that in more depth, having more control over it through the regulations that we're developing.
Okay, let's look at the other supply chain, and that's the justice supply chain. It's already a year from when the last kind of out of scope fishery took place. Out of the hundreds and maybe thousands that were on the river, we have 60 charges so far approved. Nobody's gone to court. Do we need more resources in the courts? Do we need some sort of strategy to get these dealt with? Because when you've got this much money, literally swimming up the river, enforcement or even the threat of some kind of legal action isn't going to be much of a deterrence. They will take the chance. The only thing that might work is when people start getting their property seized or end up doing time in jail. And it's a year later, and none of this has happened. So my question to you basically is, what are you doing to pull all the partners that should be working in a synchronized way to be far, far more efficient at dealing with this? And one other question, and you can answer that one and then answer this one too. Are enforcement officers afraid to enforce the law?
So as Mr. Wenzel indicated, we have both structural working groups for figuring out our approach for a coming season, where we plan with CBSA, with the RCMP, with local police, the various roles that we play, and make sure that everybody is aligned and ready. But then there is also in real time, while the fishery is underway, there is a lot of back and forth with our partners. As for the PPSC and the justice system, I think those are questions for justice and the PPSC.
But you must be talking to them. You must. I mean, that's not a question.
Yeah.
Are the officers afraid to enforce the law? Because this sounds like a pretty rough business out there in the dark. And I wouldn't blame them. I wouldn't blame them. I would suggest that, cutting off the head of the beast, that is the market, might be a heck of a lot better way to go. But to do that, you're going to need to have much, much better intelligence and much, much better knowledge of what's going on with these creatures once they're caught. Has that sort of thinking been going on?
We have been thinking about that, absolutely. And as for the officers, they are trained to deal with all kinds of situations.
But, yeah, and I
Thank you, Mr. Hardy.
Okay.
Your time has gone a little over. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to take a bit of time to make a notice of motion. I hope that everyone will, in accordance with the important drop in the biomass for shrimp, the lack of the possible disappearance of this sector and the effect on fishers, owners, employees of processing plants, as well as communities on the coast and other businesses, given the urgency of acting. In accordance with Article 108.2, the committee should undertake a study of the department's methods of fixing quotas for fishing in the Sebaste area with regard to the announcement by the Minister on 26 January with regard to the effects on the sector, and to have the Minister appear to answer the committee's questions at our meeting on 27 February, and that the committee submit its recommendations to the House on an urgent basis.
Motion? Can we get it copied and distributed? It's a notice of motion, yeah. Okay. So it doesn't have to be debated right now if it's only a notice of motion. So we'll do that at our next committee business meeting. And you have 34 seconds left, Madame Debienne.
Oh, quelle chance!
How lucky. So I'm going to ask a question. What or why do we hear that when there are violent incidents, significant incidents that have been reported, there are agents that are afraid to act or intervene? How do we respond in such cases? Of course, perhaps my colleague might want to answer, but we have to, the agents have to evaluate the situation. Sometimes they're in dangerous situations, but as we said earlier, our officers are trained in dealing with difficult situations. I don't know if you have anything to answer. Thank you very much.
Over and above that, I mean, it's not a question of fear. These are officers that went out during COVID throughout the entire period, so it's not fear. They're well trained, but they also have a mandate for fishery offenses. So violence and criminal code offenses are not something that fishery officers are deal with. This falls under the mandate of the police of jurisdiction, the RCMP as an example. So putting our officers in these situations when they're not having a mandate to address them is also a dangerous thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Debienne. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, Ms. Gibbons, my colleague, Mr. Perkins, had shared with me the impacts on neighbors who live along the river of the illegal alver fishery and the violence or the just the tremendous impacts on their capacity to feel safe in their homes as a result of the illegal poaching that's happening along the river. And I'm wondering if you can share how closing the legal alver fishery is going to help mitigate the problems that these people are experiencing of their lives being impacted by this poaching and also the environmental impacts of the poaching that's happening.
So the goal is to, as I said, try to have a deterrent impact here, to have less illegal poaching, to have less total harvesting of the resource under a closure or non-opening scenario. Because we are sort of cutting off this possibility of mixing illegally harvested and legally harvested alver. So the goal is to see less harvesting overall. Clarity, there would be greater clarity on any activity that's happening would be unauthorized. And therefore, if we do see less, that we would have greater conservation, more safety in those areas, having less of the tension between the different harvester groups as well, but just fewer people out on the rivers.
Thank you. How much time do I have left, Chair?
35 seconds.
Okay, well, this won't be answered. Maybe you could provide the rest of it in writing, but my final question is around the 2019, what happened in 2019 in Nova Scotia around the conflict and violence associated with the lobster fishery and the learnings that we should take from that, in that I am seeing also a lot of misinformation around Indigenous rights, around to access to a moderate livelihood. I'm noticing some themes and patterns that are very similar between the two, and I have concerns. So I'm wondering if you can perhaps provide in writing some learnings from the 2019 instance and how we can ensure that we don't see similar conflict arise as a result of decisions being made around the alver fishery.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Gibbons, you just stated that your goal this year by potentially not having an opening is an attempt to avoid the illegal export of any sales of elvers. Is that correct?
Harvesting. is what we're trying to diminish the harvest.
How are you going
Have
to diminish the harvest?
A deterrent. So
As a deterrent? Okay.
by not having the possibility of laundering unauthorized harvest with authorized.
Okay, so basically the laundering or the illegal export of eels to foreign countries, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. This government can't stop stolen cars or stolen trucks from being exported through the Port of Montreal, even when the owners know that they're there. How do you expect to stop a tub of eels from being exported when this government can't stop the exportation of hundreds, if not thousands, of stolen cars?
I'm certainly not qualified to speak about export of cars, but the purpose of the regulations that we're developing is to be able to have control over the various points of sale in the supply chain up to the point of export, so making it illegal to export elvers that have not been, for which there isn't a certificate of
Thank you. Has your department been able to stop the illegal harvest of elvers at this point?
well, our enforcement, sir.
Have they been able to stop it, yes or no?
From a binary perspective, there is illegal harvest, so not all certainly, but we do believe that our enforcement efforts.
So they haven't been able to stop the illegal harvest?
We don't stop it all, but we do stop
Okay, so
some,
there is
absolutely.
illegal harvest. Why is there continuing to be illegal harvest?
As we've noted, it's a very, very, the incentives to poach in this area are very, very high. And the enforcement of it is extremely difficult. Now, we certainly do try, and we've got lots of resources on it, and we've increased the resources to try to make sure that we're doing everything we can. But it is because of the number of rivers, because of the fact that there's a big payoff if
Thank
they
you.
can.
The CNP officers enforce fisheries that are regulated under the auspices of the Fisheries Act. Is that correct?
The conservation protection officers?
Yes.
They are subject to, yes.
They
yeah.
monitor and enforce
Yes.
fisheries authorized
Yes.
under the Fisheries Act. Are there any other types of authorizations where harvesters could be operating?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Are there any other types of authorizations outside of the Fisheries Act that could allow the harvest of fisheries, of elvers?
The Fisheries Act is the enabling legislation, so
So there are no other agreements that would enable the harvest of elvers?
it's the Fisheries Act that provides the authority to, we issue licenses pursuant to the Fisheries Act. That is the vehicle for authorizing fisheries.
Are there elvers being harvested under any other auspices? Rights-based harvest or any other activity?
No, not to my knowledge, sir. It would all be under the licenses under the Fisheries Act. Indigenous is under communal commercial licenses under the Fisheries Act. Yeah.
I think I'll turn my remaining 45 seconds to Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, short time. So if I understand your logic, Deputy, by taking all the legal elvers off, any elvers you find are illegal, and therefore your enforcement on that will stop the poaching? Is that the perverse logic you guys have?
Certainly not stop all poaching, but we expect that there will be, we will be able to provide clarity and a deterrent for illegal poaching in general, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question today, we hear that there will be consultations with regard to the next season. And I think that people understand the government's objective to have a reconciliation between indigenous and non-indigenous fishers in any type of fishery. There can be disagreement, there are differences, and so we're talking about consultations again, and we know that often when we have consultations, especially with First Nations, on a nation-to-nation basis, and sometimes we go outside of these. And so with regard to these consultations, will they be undertaken with all the groups at the same time, or one group, the First Nations, and then commercial fishers and others? Could we not bring everyone together to discuss? Because I think with regard to reconciliation, that's something that would be very important. Have you thought about having that, to have everyone in the same room together to discuss what is the right way forward for all types of fishery, including the Elver, in the context of reconciliation with the First Nations? Thank you very much for your questions. Of course, you mentioned the concept of nation to nation, and of course this is primordial for our relations with the First Nations in accordance with the law. And we must respect First Nations in our discussions, consultations with them, the federal government with First Nations. But at the same time, what we do with them also has an effect, an impact on others and other groups, as you mentioned. And in addition, we recognize that there is a place for dialogue, and dialogue amongst all the parties, or additionally, consultations with individual groups like the First Nations, and also consultations with other affected groups, of course. But just with regard to the Elver fishery, are you going to try to have a meeting with the commercial and indigenous fishers in the same meeting, in the same room? We have consultation advisory committees for fishery, and everyone is welcome in these meetings. And you said earlier that there are 200,000 the value of this fishery, and the need to have additional resources. Are you going to get the resources you need, the protection officers, the conservation officers that you need in order to deal with this situation? Are you guaranteed that you'll be able to have sufficient resources to deal with this problem? And we deploy resources in priority, given that this is a very particular fishery situation. And when the Elvers arrive, we do everything we can to have a maximum strength available. And with regard to protection and conservation, maybe your colleague might want to answer. And have there been threats? Have you ever been afraid of proceeding to arrests or in some of these situations? Thank you very much for your question.
It's not a question of fear. I think there's intelligence that needs to be brought forth, an understanding of the types of training and mandate that those officers have prior to entering any circumstance. And this is where the discussions with our partners is so very important. We talked about the RCMP and making sure that they're involved in that process.
Okay, ma dernière question.
My last question may be a difficult question, but that's why we're here. Do fisheries agents, officers, with regard to commercial or First Nations fishers, how have you interacted with them in the past?
I think there's a bias interaction. So from a fishery officer's perspective, it's all under the Fisheries Act. So we talked about the authorizations. Are they in place? And if they're not, then there's action taken. We had heard from some of our colleagues about PPSC and the actions they take and the bar they have. We have a very different bar. We have the bar that measures whether that activity is legal or not under the Fisheries Act, and we act accordingly using the discretion of the officers in the circumstance of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask perhaps Mr. Napier or whoever is appropriate. Are you aware that CFIA certifies Alvers that go out of the Toronto airport and they go to Hong Kong?
Yes, sir, we are aware, and we've done this because we talked about the intelligence. We're well aware of where this product is going, and that's the laundering point. Is when
have you asked CFIA to stop doing that?
The Elver that leaves is not gone out under a seafood label. It's gone out outside of a seafood label, as I understand it. Therefore,
right. It's going from a company owned by a Mr. Mao, who exports this under a CFIA banner. I'd like CFIA included in our next meeting, by the way. And his brother-in-law is the manager of Chai Can in my riding, which is owned by a Mr. He in China, who's in jail in China for importing and breaking Chinese law on importing illegal seafood. This is the money behind this operation. Are you pursuing that and shutting down Zhang Chao at Atlantic Chai Can? And are you shutting down the company in Toronto that's exporting these illegal Elvers and charging them?
so one of the challenges is Elver, once laundered and mixed, it's very difficult to determine which part of that product is legitimate. There are transit of Elver from the Caribbean and other jurisdictions that go through and are, at least in our minds, legitimate and have not come from Canadian waters.
Right, but when the TAC that this department sets is only 9,900 kilograms, and 100 times that is going out the Toronto airport, it's pretty safe to say that 9 out of 10 of the exports are illegal. Wouldn't you agree? Or do you think 100 tons of eels going out of Toronto is all legal?
So, sir, without any understanding of the traceability and unfortunately not being barcoded, we aren't able to determine legitimate and authorized.
I get that. And there lies the problem. The industry is proposing to you, Deputy Minister, to the Minister, she's not here, so I'll have to rely on you, has been proposing traceability for 6 years. In fact, this last year, they proposed a system. They offered to pay for it, and DFO turned them down instead, shut the fishery down. Why has it taken so long for them to put in place a system that's been in place in the United States and Maine for years, and that the industry itself is offering to pay for?
We agree on the importance of a traceability system and regulations on possession along the supply chain really go hand in hand. The regulations are what will give us the additional enforcement authorities to prohibit possession of a license of Elver, and the traceability system will allow us to be able to track what's happening across the supply chain. So we need those two pieces. We've been working very hard on it, made very good progress on the regulations. There's still work to do.
As part of this enforcement plan that DFO has been working on, did the Minister go to Treasury Board for more resources to support the plan and get turned down?
We have the resources that we have for our CMP, and we prioritize within those resources.
So I'll take that as a yes. So the colleagues around the cabinet table refused to give more resources to DFO to do it. So unfortunately, your hands are tied with very limited resources. Can you tell me how many enforcement officers have been added in the last 8 years to DFO?
There have been some added, but I don't know the exact number. Does anyone have the exact number in the last 8 years?
So we've had 8 years, no, but over the last 2 or 3, we've had a number of troops graduate, which is between 60 and 90 officers that we've added to the mix. We would have to give you a written response for the rest.
If you could, 60 and 90, God bless all of them for doing that and taking it on. But the The incredible thing is that DFO's added 443 people to HR, putting HR over 800 people in that time, have over 1,200 people now in corporate services, finance, and administration. A huge growth in the bureaucracy in Ottawa. Meanwhile, the great focus on enforcement, which is enforcement is key to any sustainable fishery. Without it, you cannot have a sustainable fishery. The priority of the department minister, under the 6 ministers and now your leadership, is to put it on administration and not on enforcement. Why?
We have had a tremendous growth in the size of
the department. That's for sure.
Of staff in the department in the last 8 years, and as is typical when you're increasing your various functions.
You've grown from 10 to 15,000.
I'm sorry, I'm
Only
going to
60
interrupt, Mr.
enforcement
Perkins.
officers.
You've gone well over your time frame. I tried to allow an answer, but you kept asking questions. I'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Did you want to take it?
Well, one of you go.
That would be Mr. Kellaway. So that's okay.
Better hairdo.
There you go. Better hairdo. Yeah, indeed. In terms of traceability as being, I look at this whole situation as like a tire, and then you have the spokes. The spokes are the solutions or the remedies or the things that we want to put in place to prevent illegal actors harvesting and exporting. So traceability was brought up today. That's one. So the last round of questioning, I got in my main question, but I think this is an opportunity. Okay, so let's take a look at Maine. What have they done in terms of traceability? But what are the other things that make up their plan of attack in terms of enforcement, in terms of focusing on collaboration with Indigenous people, and also what is their overall plan to negate what is happening in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick? What could we learn from them? And are we actually focused on that as a best practice?
I'll start and then turn it to Doug. Maine has really took the time to develop these controls all along the supply chain so that there wouldn't be leakage and ability to do this sort of laundering that we've talked a lot about today. And Maine also has a very robust traceability system, including I don't know, credit card is not the right term, but basically, people have a card that allows for, they need to, swipe when they are registering legal product. And so there's this constant tallying up of legally caught catch. And so it is a very, as I mentioned earlier, this sort of integration between the regulations that provide the controls all along the supply chain with the very robust traceability system to track everything happening along the supply chain. It's kind of the key to Maine's.
Can I interject just for 1 second? And then I think you're going to go to Mr. Wenzel, and I want you to do that. My understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, that there was a period of time where Maine put a pause on their Elver fishery to ensure that there wasn't just one solution, but a suite of solutions. That it wasn't just a guinea pig, let's see what happens this year, but to get it right, to effectively get it right for the license holders, for the First Nations, for the communities that reside in the area where Elver fishery takes place. Can you talk about that for a second?
That's right. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So, Mr. Chair, yeah, we've been working closely with the state of Maine, and our fisheries management team has built our approach off of theirs in terms of the regulatory measures and the work towards a traceability system. The member is absolutely right. Maine has had a number of different closures of their fishery over the years, and it's taken them about 6 years to develop what they have right now. And we do have some added complexity from a Canadian context in terms of the size of the fishery, in terms of Indigenous consultation, in terms of different jurisdictions. State of Maine manages both the harvest, buying, selling, all of those elements. So we do have a few added components that we need to work through, but we're certainly not reinventing the wheel. We've been able to learn a lot from the state of Maine, and very grateful for that.
It's time, Mr. Chair.
1 minute and 13 seconds.
Excellent. So I want to pivot for a second on at least MP Barron brought this up in an earlier question. Do we have any quantifiable data on the impact of all of this fishing, illegal fishing of Elver? Do we have any sense of the stock? Do we have any sense of, obviously common sense would be that the impact to the stock is really serious, but that's my assumption. That's my opinion. Do we have any data on the impact of what's been happening over the last 4 years in terms of that stock?
So again, thanks for the question. So we do monitor Elver returns in one of the key rivers in East River, Nova Scotia. And that's our key indicator to make sure that the stock continues to be somewhat stable. So we have seen continued Elver abundance at a similar level in terms of returns. So that's encouraging. What we're not seeing are those returns translating into large eel abundance. Mm-hmm. And we need the large eels to return to the Sargasso Sea to complete that life cycle. So all that to say, managing removals from the fishery continues to be an important factor in terms of conservation. So that's why, unreported catch, unauthorized catch, some of the numbers that we've seen in different years that have, basically resulted in the closures that we've seen. Part of those drivers have been around the conservation concerns in terms of removals from the fishery.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please. Yes.
Oh, c'est moi.
Yes.
Oh, excusez.
Is it my turn? Sorry. Okay. My question, I wonder about the future of fishing in general, especially in Quebec, as we say. We eat a lot of fish, and here we have a fishery that's going to be closed because of the problems, the situation that we've been describing, and then there's also the mackerel fishery, and shrimp are almost closed, and the redfish as well. We don't know how whether the redfish will be able to survive in the long term, and so there are a great number of challenges, and we're very close to a crisis in fishing, and given that fact, and for the future, I mean, the fishers who are listening to us, they don't have any idea of how they might be able to maintain their fishery and how the fishery could rebound. And with regard to the Elver, there are a lot of very difficult and dangerous situations. And how can we ensure the fishing industry as an element of the economy can be guaranteed in the future? Do we have to just protect the resource or protect the fishers, or and trying to protect an economic sector? And I'm really glad that I'm not in your chair. But what is the situation? Certainly, we're very aware of the importance of fishing for coastal communities. We know that it's essential for the economies or the economy of these areas, and the effects of fishing laws. We take into account, of course, the effect of laws and regulations on these communities and on the sectors, and of course we have to protect the fishing stocks, and there is also the factor of climate change. We talk about climate change a lot, and the effect But in general, there are other pressures as well. And so this informs all our policies and practices. The owner-operators and others. This is a way of trying to protect communities, and the decision with regard to redfish. There is an element which is relating to the fish for fishing for shrimp, and in all our decisions, in all our policies and programs, generally speaking, we take into account the effects of our policies and decisions on the communities. Sorry.
And you had a 2-minute question and a 2-minute answer, so I was very free with you there that time. So again, that's a good way to stretch out a 2.5-minute question period. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps, Ms. Gibbons, I could get you to answer my previous question around the learnings from the 2019 conflicts around the lobster fishery. And also, I just wanted to point out, so Naomi Metallic, who's an associate professor and chancellor's chair of Aboriginal law and policy at Dalhousie University, was here recently speaking to us in relation to the illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, which of course is completely interconnected to what we are talking about today. And some of the testimony that she provided, she shared the concerns that some of the discussions have been one-sided, often equating Indigenous fishing with illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And she points out that this entirely overlooks that we are talking about constitutionally protected rights that require respect and implementation by governments, especially so given Canada's passing of the Act on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And I'm wondering if you can provide some comments and thoughts around that, and I'm happy to get further written information as well after the fact.
Well, there's certainly a lot of learnings that come out of really difficult situations like that, and Doug was managing our region during the height of a very tense period, and may add some important observations. I think one of the things, there's sort of managing in the moment and figuring out how to diffuse the tensions, but I think over the longer term, what we really have, we focused on a few things, I would say, and one of them, the most important one, is sort of understanding what Indigenous communities are looking for in terms of access to the fishery and finding ways to support that. And we have done a fair bit of movement on moderate livelihood through rights and reconciliation agreements in the last few years, also through these moderate livelihood fishing plans, which are not formal agreements, but are understandings, and that kind of set out a vision for a community for how they would like to be involved in the fishery, and then the department finding a way to support them to move towards those objectives. So that's a really, really important piece. I think one of the other things that we recognize that there's great interest and there may be impacts on non-Indigenous communities when changes are made in terms of Indigenous participation, Indigenous community participation, and there, we have frequent dialogues, and we recognize that we have to be open about what we are doing and why we're doing it, and to take the time for those conversations as well. And I will say that in my own exchanges with fish harvester associations in moderate livelihood regions, if you will, and this could play across the country on reconciliation more generally, but my observation is that people really do want to try to find a way that, to reconcile and to provide more realization of the objectives of Indigenous communities, that there is a genuine support for that. And there may be differences in the, in approach and phasing and those sorts of things, but there is that support. And we find, often I'm meeting with the leadership of fish harvester associations, and they show a genuine willingness to find solutions and work with their members to be able to bridge some of those divides. I think that, what I would say is everyone realizes that these are groups that are living side by side, that are fishing side by side. They're working together on wharves, and they really want to try to work together in harmony. And they have many success stories that they will share on both sides. And so that's very encouraging to hear. We have to keep at that, and we have to keep those dialogues going, and we have to do it in a way that's respectful of both groups.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. You outdone Madam Debbie in that time. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
True. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to Ms. Gibbons. Is it not the role of your department and your minister to protect the livelihoods of harvesters, to protect the economic output of the fishing industry? Isn't that one of your big roles?
The role is focused on the management of the resource, and we take into account, of course, the reality that the socioeconomic reality of the management of the resource. And the interests of communities, of course, is very important.
So you've known about these issues for several years, and they've basically mushroomed, but you've had over a year now to come up with a management plan. Why is a year not enough with you've had nearly a 50% increase in your staff, over a doubling in DFO's budget since 2015, since this government got elected? What do you need to get the job done? Is it possible that you can actually do the job?
I would say, and it's a point I made before, not to put everything on this, but the regulatory process is really the key determinant of the speed at which we go. And, there is as you know, Mr. Chair, there are sort of steps that we follow when we're bringing in regulations. And, it takes time. And regulatory processes typically take more than 2 years.
I heard you in talking to Mr. Perkins, you talked about a traceability system. The Elver harvesters themselves identified 2 contractors that could have provided traceability to you. Did you speak to either one of those contractors? Did you let them know that you had this traceability system out to tender?
I'll ask Adam about I know that there were definitely conversations with the Elver license holders on traceability systems, and we were working together on what we could do. And I think that ultimately, because the department was working on the regulations, and the regulations and the traceability system are sort of 2 sides of the same coin. Yeah. And so to do traceability without the regulations
did you speak
is limited.
Did you locate anyone that could bid on this?
So as the Deputy Minister indicated, there's 2 parts to it, and certainly the regulatory piece is necessary in order for it to be mandatory.
Did you identify anyone that could provide the traceability?
Yeah, and so in parallel to the development of the regulations, we were actively engaged in sourcing a traceability system.
But did you locate anyone? Did you find anyone?
So a number of options were being...
yes or no? Is there someone that could provide this service?
There are a number of providers that would be appropriate for providing this service. As I believe the Parliamentary Secretary mentioned earlier, there is a system that was used in Maine. And so those options were being evaluated.
So I got another question for you. If you started cleaning up poachers now, could you have them all cleaned up by the middle of April so that the licensed harvesters could then start fishing mid-April? Because I'm sure it would be too tempting for the poachers not to go. Is it not possible that you could clean most of them up by getting serious with it so that you could have a regulated fishery beginning April 15th?
I'm not sure that there's a capacity to really have everyone taken out of you know, like they may still, even if people were charged, they may still.
How many 4x4 pickups did you take last year on the spot?
We can come back to you with.
How many ATVs did you take on the spot?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of these really detailed questions on enforcement, I think, you know, we would have to really go back and consider.
Are your officers armed,
domain.
trained, and armed, as our like police officers?
They're trained and armed. Yes.
They're trained and armed.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think you're afraid
Thank you, Mr. Small.
to
Your
do their
time
job?
has expired. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Mr. Chair, I believe I'm.
You're up, are you? Okay, nobody told me that. Mr. Morrissey, 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question, Ms. Gibbons, how many jurisdictions enforce a regulated elver fishery? Is it just Canada? I take it not.
No, there is elver fishing in several European countries that is regulated. The state of Maine as well. Like there are different jurisdictions. There is a
that regulate.
Yeah.
An elver fishery.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to go back to on the traceability. Am I correct that Maine has had a traceability system for some time? You're saying yes. How long?
I'm not sure. We could come back to you on the exact
If
date
you
of it.
would.
I think it's been in place now for several years. Yeah.
And I assume they put it in place. Were they dealing with a significant illegal fishery
Yes,
in Maine?
they had the same situation. Yeah.
Okay. So why? Can you tell the committee? Are there any tools that you are missing in DFO or the or other departments that allows you to effectively get control of what, by any stretch of the imagination, was an extremely unlawful summer?
I think the regulations giving us the ability to require a license for possession all along the supply chain, that is a really crucial missing
Could you
piece.
expand a bit more? I would have assumed there would have been, but
That
could
is
you
not the
expand?
case right
That's
now.
not the
Right
case?
now, it is just that we're the first point of possession, which is the harvest and sale from harvest to the first buyer. But as you keep going along, and these
And who would have jurisdiction over those various other steps as
so
you
that
move?
is not regulated at the moment.
No, but who would have jurisdiction to regulate? What's the regulatory framework you would be looking at?
That's what we're proposing to bring in now. Yeah.
You're proposing to bring it in, yes, but who, explain a bit more on what you plan on bringing in.
So
Because
it's-
often it is in the regulation where the control must be. And we've seen some of the unregulated or unreported situations in the lobster fishery, which is the buyer and the processor, which is provincially regulated. So are we seeing the same in the elver fishery in the requirement that you referenced in more regulatory?
Yeah. So there is a gap in a regulatory framework now. So under the Fisheries Act, we are limiting our intervention is limited to the harvest and that first sale, and it's as you go further
So
along.
you only have jurisdiction over the harvest, and where would most of the profitable illegal activity, in your opinion, be occurring? How far down the road from the fisher? I see a smile from Mr. Wenzel, so you may want to comment.
Yeah, there is right at the harvest there's a huge margin, and that's why the poachers are out there.
Yes.
But there would be along the further.
Yeah,
points
just
along the
just
chain.
just to build on the deputy's response, certainly provincial jurisdictions have the authority in terms of the buying and selling aspect of seafood, and we've talked about colleagues at
Is the
CBSA
same
in terms of
the
export.
Elver? Same in the Elver?
That includes any harvestable product. But, one of the reasons that we're proceeding as a department with federal regulations is because we know that this product exits from Canada at different points. So to try to work with multiple provinces to get various regulatory tools lined up would take us far longer. So that's exactly why we're proceeding with federal regulations.
Okay, I appreciate the bit of time I have left. How many in a possible closure, how many fishers that would, their only source of income would be the Elver fishery would be impacted? Do we know that?
So there are 8 license holders.
There's only 8 license holders?
Just license, and then there's Indigenous communal commercial, but there are 8 license holders. Now, they employ people
There's only
to
8
fish.
license holders, and this thing is a mess?
But they employ people to harvest on the rivers, so they're not alone, 8 people alone.
Okay.
They employ people as well.
And
Thank
if
you, Mr. Morrissey. Right on the mark. Glad I caught you. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
I think those 8 plus the 3 communal, well, the 8 anyway, employ 200-300 harvesters that do this for them. Deputy, you said you've started the regulatory process, that the speed of that is 2 years. 2 years from now, because we've seen 6 years of poaching escalating every year. Why did it take 6 years to start another 2-year process? Are you telling us that we're likely to have a closure until that's done?
We have accomplished quite a bit in the regulatory development process in the past year. So we are really pushing. I can't speak about approvals because that's sort of outside my control, but certainly we are really pushing to move as quickly as we can on the regulations.
You have draft regulations. You're pushing through the process now.
We are very advanced in
Okay.
the regulatory process.
I'm going to take a bit of a change of pace, if I could. Dr. John Reynolds, who's the chair of COSUIC, was before this committee last year. And I asked him about Elvers. And some of what I've read in your responses to the industry has been, we have to be very cautious. We can't increase the TAC to give more access because we're going through a species at risk and COSUIC process, although there are enormous and plentiful Elvers on the East Coast. I asked if they could separate through the SARA and COSUIC process the Elvers where there is a challenge in Ontario and the St. Lawrence because of damming of lakes and that kind of thing, versus the East Coast where that doesn't happen. And he said yes for 2 reasons. One is they are in more abundance, and we can separate that in the process. And 2, that they probably have slightly genetic differences, although they all are born in the same place. So why is it when the previous minister wrote me back on that issue, she said there was no way to do that?
There was no way to separate out the two.
The Atlantic from the inland Elver issue.
I can't speak to that. I certainly would be happy to provide you with more detail. I don't know if anyone here.
We've been told you will not issue, then they will not do a DU, what's called a DU, which is the designated separately.
Right.
Not because of any issue or science behind it.
Yeah.
It doesn't appear you have any science.
There are science assessments on eels, on the population for sure.
On eels, not Elvers, but on eels. Yeah.
It's the same population, right? The eel.
Well,
Yeah.
yes and no, because every year, the only science that goes on Elvers has been on the East River in Chester. No translation?
Okay, c'est bon.
It's okay?
It's good now? Okay.
So the East River Chester is where the industry has paid for the science that has been used by the department. Why didn't you at least put the enforcement into the East River so the science could be done last year? And will you ensure that that river is safe so the science can be done this year?
The river is included in our overall enforcement plan, and so, I mean, specific sites would be very much the determination of conservation and protection based on the intelligence and their risk assessment of where to put resources at any given time.
In the memo to the minister last year to close the Elver fishery down, it said that they would leave that open so the science could be done that year, but yet no enforcement was done on that river, so no science was run. So I'd like a guarantee that the science will be done this year on that river.
The science is underway, right? Like we have plans to continue the science on the river. There's no change in that.
You have plans, but there was none last year. So you're guaranteeing me here you will do the science on the East River this year?
Maybe I'll take it back,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just I don't want to mislead anyone. And
Every day last year, here's just a sample. The minister and Mr. Kerr were emailed by the industry with specific reports of poaching going on in the rivers. They have live active cameras. These are not the hundreds of rivers that aren't licensed, these are which had poaching, these rivers. They never got a response once from DFO or DFO enforcement, and not one of the people on here was arrested, including the case I brought up last week in this, where the fluke net was stolen by the Elver fishery, and that was reported to DFO, and no charges were laid against the individual who stole the net, even though it had a GPS tracker on it and a DFO license. Why is it that no enforcement is happening when the industry complains? One of these rivers is 2 minutes. The Sackville River is 2 minutes from your enforcement office, yet nobody ever came.
Thank you for the question, and I certainly can't speak to what happened last year, but I know that there is a plan in place this year that contemplates a number of improvements and additions of resources as well.
But you were in charge last year. You can't explain
Sorry,
that.
Mr. Perkins, your time has gone way over. And if there's...
You did stop the clock on, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
okay.
so now your time has expired. We'll now go to, I have Mr. Callaway down, but it's going to be Mr. Hardy, I believe, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You all appear so calm and we all appear so frustrated down here because we see a recipe for simply a repeat of what's been happening and escalating over the last number of years. Regulations, laws are what they are, but there's so much money involved here that people will ignore them, basically. So I want to get your help in painting the picture for us of an enforcement action. Somebody's fishing on the river, they don't have a license, enforcement shows up, either DFO or RCMP or both. What happens? What are the enforcement options available to the officers when they apprehend somebody fishing without a license?
Well, there's certainly a continuum of options available. So if the circumstances are safe to proceed, and you mentioned the RCMP, so in those cases, I think what you would do is look for authorization. Where it was absent, then you would move. So there's an inspection component to it. So inspection is a verification of compliance and making sure everything is as it should be. And where it's not, you move into you have reason to believe. That's where the investigation component comes in. Evidence is collected, and so on and so forth. And
Okay,
then
but
based
so on
on-
and so
sorry.
forth. Does that automatically mean that they're marched off to a paddy wagon somewhere and taken away, or do they just say, hey, take the rest of the night off and we'll see you tomorrow night?
Well, again, it would be circumstance-based and based on the officer's discretion, but the magnitude of it would be proportional. It could be a warning depending on the offense, all the way through to, as you mentioned, seizures and things of that nature.
So if that's the routine, and from the sounds of things, neither the enforcement nor all of the rest of the justice supply chain is really equipped to handle any large volume of apprehensions, it would appear that we have. I'm going to start sounding like a conservative here. We have a revolving door. We unfortunately have a situation where people are said, "Gee whiz, that's not a good thing. Please don't do that again, and we'll see you tomorrow night." Okay, that's the impression that we have. Can you tell us we're wrong?
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. And well, I mentioned that the officers that are seen, so the public sees some of the enforcement action, but it does not see all of it. There are elements both at the facilities, at the exit points, and then the intelligence that's being gathered as well. So there's a whole continuum, not just of the officers appearing on the water, but also gathering intelligence, trying to understand where the fish are going, or the elvers are going, which is an important part of it. And then the deterrent impact is stopping it along the way. So at source, of course, with the number of streams, it's far more difficult to stop it. And it's why we strategically deployed resources throughout the chain to try to disrupt that activity throughout the chain.
I'm sorry, but with respect, I don't see or hear much about disruption. Disruption would be hauling somebody off and taking the keys to their truck. And I get the sense that, you know, the discretion being exercised does not result in that, probably in the majority of cases. So I would like you guys to be as frustrated as we are, you know. I'd like to see, you know, examples made, because that'll send a far, far stronger signal to the community than new regulations, et cetera, which they will ignore anyway because there's just simply too much money to be made, and they're making lots of money from the sounds of things. That's all I have.
Go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Like Mr. Hardy said, we have regulations. We want to think that they'll be effective, but I think we have enough experience around the table to know that there are many ways of getting around the regulations and rules. And what I'm afraid of is that the most honest individuals who want to obey the rules, and they've developed their fishery. The same situation in other types of fishing, and they end up being penalized. They have to stop their activities. They have to stop fishing. They lose their licenses, and often these were the ones that were exemplary in the past. So I think that at the end of all this, there will be frustration, anger, mutual recriminations, and we'll end up in an impasse. And that might be irreversible. And if we're in living under the rule of law, what makes you think that you'll be able to change things in the short term? Yes, certainly we don't want to penalize anyone, and we understand the impacts on license holders. But there is this bigger challenge because we have to do something in the short term because the elvers are going to be arriving, and that's for the short term. But in the midterm, we have to change our regulations and our measures, add to our staff, and consult with Indigenous communities and also with the license holders, and have a different kind of elver system. And we're working very hard to move forward in this area. Thank you.
Debienne will now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, Ms. Gibbons, is this may be a bit of a repeat, but perhaps you can refine it a little bit for me. It's clear that Fisheries and Oceans is not responding to all the reports that are coming forward around poaching based on the information that we're receiving. And so how is it decided which reports to respond to? And can you walk me through that process of when a report is received and the actions that are taken, or a lack of actions that are taken moving forward?
So this is very much determined within the chain of command of Conservation Protection Branch. And so I think if you agree, I will ask Brent to provide those details.
Thank you. And so as you can imagine, I mean, in addition to those, a CMP at the detachment level receives countless So there's a triage process that occurs. And so they look at species and risk and where the source is and a series of other criteria to help to support, is this something that a fishery officer should look at, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the piece there. Where then something is sort of a high risk, it's something that seems plausible, it seems something that we should take action on, then officers are assigned to go out and conduct an inspection and move from that position.
Okay, thank you. I guess this may be a bigger question, so I'll ask it quickly, but we were talking about there being 8 license holders and that I heard my colleagues say that there's 200 to 300 harvesters. Can you explain to me sort of the economic chain of how that all works out? How are the license, I'm assuming that there must be, I just want to understand, is there a lot of money being made here? Are the harvesters the ones making a lot of money here, or is it predominantly the license holders, which is the system that we tend to see in fisheries?
Well, the landed value of Elver in recent years, and it has gone up over time, but the landed value that has gone to the 8 license holders is about $45 million in recent years. And that does include a small portion, which was a little bit more, sort of close to 24% last year, that went to communal commercial harvesters in Indigenous communities. But the vast majority of that $45 million goes to the 8 license holders. And as I believe Mr. Perkins remarked, the 8 license holders do hire people to go and fish on the rivers, and we understand that there are about 200 people, give or take, who they employ to do that. So they each have their quota, their share of quota, and then they can go and fish it according to the management regime that's been set by the region.
Not making millions. Thank you.
That concludes our line of questioning today's meeting and our guests. I want to thank Mr. Burns, Ms. Gibbons, Mr. Wenzel, Mr. Napier. Yes, point of order, Mr. Perkins.
We are to go to 5:30. Perhaps the government and our side still have within that. We could split that time up, try and ask a couple more questions, because we do have, the committee is scheduled to go to 5:30.
Okay, well, we got 4 minutes left. So who's going for 2 minutes from your side? Yeah, one question each.
I'll start right away. Ms. Gibbons, this is the decision today to basically not open the fishery or not reissue the licenses has been said to be a $100 million decision. What justification do you have for that?
At this point, it is not a decision. It's not a final decision. It's a statement of intention and consultation.
But the decision is there would be no reissue of licenses this year. That's the minister's letter.
Yeah, the letter says intention is not to issue licenses. Is not to issue licenses. Yeah, this year. So not to open, essentially.
Correct.
The figure that you're referring to, I'm not sure. I suspect it's sort of beyond the landed value, but the justification for it is the challenges in the incentives in this fishery for illegal poaching, and the challenges in managing it in an orderly way, and for the conservation of the stock and the safety of communities, are what are behind that announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Kellaway for a question.
Thanks. Actually, just 2 very quick questions, and I guess one quick question related to strategy for this year. And I know we don't want to telegraph our moves for those that are out there that are thinking about illegally fishing, but at what point will people get a sense of what the strategy is on the water and on the land? And in terms of the second piece, when do you think the suite of offerings in terms of solutions for obviously next year will be, communicated? Thank you.
So I think in terms of the strategy, I mean, the officers are out in communities on the rivers, and people see them, and so they get a little bit of sense of that. I think that in general, there's a certain amount of information that is shared in the public interest, and then there's a certain amount of information that, from a risk-based enforcement perspective is maintained within conservation and protection. In terms of what will happen with the toolkit, we're moving really quickly. We hope to continue on quickly through the regulatory process, meet all of the requirements that we need to be able to bring in new regulations, and to continue on the conversations with the harvesters, the license holders, and Indigenous communities on their interests.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway, and that concludes our questioning for today, and it ends today's meeting. I again want to thank Mr. Burns, Ms. Gibbons, Mr. Wenzel, Mr. Napier for coming from the department each and every time we invite you and sharing your knowledge with the committee, and hopefully it adds to our final report. So again, on Thursday, we will commence our study of Yukon salmon with witnesses. Meeting adjourned.